I help a lot of the researchers with their presentations when they have posters at various conferences. We have like 3 big conferences a year and anywhere from like 20 to 40 posters during that time. So how many of you go to conferences and present posters? Okay, good. How many of you actually work here at OSU, at Ohio State? Okay, great. Okay. Even for those of you that don't, for those of you that are at Ohio State, there's a lot of templates available for you that you may not know about, so I'll help you out to show you those. So your point when you have a poster is you want people to stop. I know at the conferences, I've been to some for optometry, and there's usually like hundreds and hundreds of people lined up, hundreds and hundreds of posters lined up, and your goal is you want them to stop at yours and not the next person's, because you want them to understand your research. So even if maybe your research is better than like the other people around you, if your poster is boring, they're not going to stop. So you want to draw people in and get people to read it and to learn about the great stuff that you're doing. So for poster design, basic rules: keep text to a minimum, which a lot of you may know, but keeping text to a minimum is a really key point, and you want to focus on whatever major points you have and use graphs and cool pictures that you might have, cool photos. They're your friends. For instance, this is a poster I did once, and they didn't want to cut the text, and it's probably something you probably wouldn't want to stop at because it's so text heavy. It's just totally boring. If there's something like this right next to it that has all these pictures, all these graphs, I would be drawn to this, no matter what the topic. Maybe that other topic is something I'm more interested in, but I'm not going to stop to figure that out. I'm going to go to this one because it looks so cool. So you just have to draw people in if you want them to know what you're talking about. So that's a kind of big point to think about when you're thinking about laying out your poster. What's your key point? Do you have any images? If you don't have images, are there any graphs? Are there any tables that you can make look interesting to draw people in? Color is another key point. Here at Ohio State, scarlet and gray is very important. I know most people, I have Adobe InDesign because I'm a designer. Most people don't want to buy that if they typically don't design stuff and page layout and things like that. So usually PowerPoint is what people use. How many use PowerPoint for their posters? Okay, yeah, PowerPoint. So I've converted. I hated PowerPoint, hated PowerPoint. I converted though because once we started getting into templates, Ohio State came up with some poster templates about 1.5 years ago. I kind of manipulated them into maybe to hone them in just to be optometry specific, but still use the basis that they started off with because they were great templates. Anyways, I did this so that when I'm working with all the researchers I work with, that we could have a more easy way of flowing. Because I used to make the poster, save it as a PDF, send it to them. They would try and mark it up or send me emails back. It just got to be kind of a hassle. So I've kind of developed an affection for PowerPoint now, even though I hated it before. So there are some things that I've learned about it that may be helpful to you if you use it, if you're frustrated with Nudge or frustrated with certain things, that hopefully, if nothing else, you'll get that out of this presentation that might help you as you're working in PowerPoint. But color is very important. PowerPoint, you can select the color with RGB. There's some color breakdowns. For optometry, we use the seafoam green, the aqua color that's on the secondary palette for Ohio State as one of our secondary colors, our main identifier. That's why it's up there in the PowerPoint template. I would limit your poster to 2 to 3 colors. You can do a lot with a few colors. Limit it. That'll make it easier to read, easier for people to understand what's going on. If you have a certain study going on, you have your own logo, and you have a look that you've had with certain brochures. This one actually is a study that Jeff did, and we had a really cute brochure. It was a study for kids. BLIMP was the acronym, and it was just kind of a fun study, and so we didn't want our poster to be not fun because like the study was just super fun. So I used the color palette from the existing study. Obviously the logo's dated, so this is from a few years ago. This is a template that we use that's used as the optometry colors, the Ohio State Scarlet Gray, and then the optometry Aqua. In it, you can see that there's 2 options that I gave for people to use for graphs. One has like the scarlet band on top, which I think is great for a header. Use this like a dark color band white text. It makes a really nice header. It stands out from everything else. And then for the following lines in the graph, to do like alternating colors is really nice, like 2 tones of gray. Oops, I'm not used to the pointer. Like 2 tones of gray, that's like 30%, 10%, or 20%, 10%, and then the aqua, like 2 different tones. It just makes it easy to read, but still defines the line. Another template. And here's what they came up with, which looks really good. It has a lot of, they wanted these images to be front and center, so they made them the biggest ones, and it just, it flows really nicely. This is another one. They didn't have quite as many pictures, but they had more tables. Another one, lots of pictures, and it just shows you like how the different people chose to use the different templates that they were given, and they all look great. Again, with the tables, a lot of times I find it's nice to use like a white text with a dark color. So if you're not Ohio State, if you're not OSU Scarlet and Gray, whatever institution you have most likely has a color palette. They most likely have a main color or like 2 main colors. So what I would do is go to them and go to the design department that they may have at that institution and ask them what's the colors you should be using, and pick that. Just because if you're representing your institution, you want to identify with it, especially with Ohio State. We want to identify with it because it's huge, and it only, I think, elevates your research when you're associated with it. Font choice for your poster. Arial is preferred for Ohio State. They also have 2 other fonts, but you have to buy those. So if you don't want to buy fonts, Arial is default, and most people have it on their computer. The great thing about Arial is it's nice and clean. It's sans serif, which is different than Times New Roman that has the little serif things on it. And it's great to read from a distance. These are just some rough estimates. If your body copy is at 30 points, you're usually doing pretty good. If you have to shrink it down, most likely it's a sign you have too much text. Headers are good at 40 to 50 points, and titles good like 60 to 75 points. Those are kind of just general guidelines that are good to follow. And Arial has many options, so whatever font you would choose to pick one that has lots of options. It could be bold, black, regular, italic, and then you can use the different colors. So you have many options and many type treatments within your poster. Just make sure you're consistent. If you have a header, make sure the header is always the same type treatment. If it's caps in one, it needs to be caps in all. If it's upper lower in one, it has to be upper lower in all. It just helps people understand where they're at in the poster. Body, same thing. If you have a caption and it's all italics, make sure they're all italics. It just makes it way easier for the person viewing it to get what's going on. Size of the poster. Size just depends on wherever you're at, and it changes. I mean, we have a meeting, an academy meeting, and every year it's at a different location. And the size of the poster is determined on the hall that they use to display the posters and the size of the boards they can display the posters on. So it went from 8 feet by 4 feet one year to 4 feet by 4 feet. That's a huge difference. So if you're designing for an 8 by 4 and you find out, oh shoot, it's 4 by 4. That's a big problem, so you want to know that ahead of time. So just make sure you know where you're going, you know what size the poster is supposed to be. Secondly, you want to make sure wherever you're getting your poster printed, if it's not in your office, if you have to go off site to get it printed, know what size roll they have on their printer. Because most printers, my printer, I have a 36, I can do a 36 roll or a 42 roll, and so the Academy posters are 4 by 4. Well, I can only make it 48 inches by 42 because 42 is the width of the paper. So know the conference size and then know your printer what size they are, because it'll make it so much easier. You make this beautiful poster and then they have to shrink it or change the size slightly because you didn't check that out first. You don't want to run into that. You want your poster to be great and you want it to print out exactly how you want it. So those are just things you can do ahead of time that will save you a lot of headache, a lot of heartache. PowerPoint itself cannot exceed 56-inch width. So for some of our conferences, we have one up in Cleveland that is, it can be up to 8 feet, which I think is a little too long. So I've made them down to like 72 feet or 72 inches. I've eliminated some of the feet just because it got way too long. Even though they let you do it, you don't have to be that long. So that's another thing. If the board is that long, but your information fits better a little bit smaller, make it smaller. You want it to look as good as you can. And if it's going to look a little not as good longer, then shrink it down. If your poster, so for the ones that are beyond 56 inches, do it at 50%. So I would make it exactly half the size, and when it goes to print out, you print it out at 200%. That way, you can still get your large poster, and you trick PowerPoint into doing it for you. When you do that, though, you have to make sure that the font size, so if your body copy is supposed to be 30 point, make sure you make it 15 point. So everything just goes in half, and then you can have the great size you want. Make sure your printer knows you have to print it out 200%. But that's how you can trick PowerPoint, and you can get it to a size you need, even though PowerPoint has limitations. Determine where you get it printed, and size limitations. Images in the poster. There's nothing worse than having like a great idea of what you want in your poster, and then like you grab it from the internet, you put on your poster, then it prints out big, and it's all like bitmappy, pixely. It just doesn't look good. It doesn't look professional. So your best friend is to use a vector image. If you're using like a graph or a grid, this one over here was, I just grabbed it from the website, plopped it in. It's like grainy, kind of, it's not as crisp. This one over here, oops, corner. That one is a PNG file. They work really well on PowerPoint. I don't know why. They work way better than JPEGs, I think. So if it's like a graphic image, PNG is a really good file, and it imports into PowerPoint. So that one's a lot cleaner. This one also is a PNG file. So if you're getting your logos from a designer, luckily I have Illustrator, so I can save them pretty much for an export and whatever I want. But if you have a design office, you could say, okay, can I have the logo in this version? Most likely, the logo was most likely created in Illustrator, for any logo probably was created in Illustrator. And if you have the department that can open it in Illustrator, they can export it and save it into these formats. So it shouldn't be a problem. And if you have Illustrator, then you're in luck because it's super easy. But if you don't, just ask the right questions. For authors, just on your poster, make sure it's correct spelling, check degrees, and check the institution name, and make sure that everything is represented how it's supposed to be. This is the place that you can get templates here at OSU. And you just go to, actually, I shouldn't even put that in there. That you don't even need. Just type in brand.osu.edu/presentations, and that'll get you there. They have a bunch of different options for PowerPoint. It's really great. So, and you can a lot of times take those and change them to what you need. Okay, now can I edit the PowerPoint? Like, can I go in and show people something? Will it work, or?
You'll have to escape out of there.
Escape out. Okay. I'll go over this, and then I'll try and do it on screen. These are helpful tips. I was really frustrated with PowerPoint at first because a lot of times when you want to move something or nudge it, it goes too far. And it's like, no, I want it right in between where it nudged it. You can change those settings. You go to, I'm going to escape out. How do I escape out?
Just escape button.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So, and now I went on farther.
I took it off the
there we
screen
go.
now.
Oh. Well, then.
I think maybe it may not happen.
Okay. Then I'll just talk you through it, and you can just try it out on your own. Or if you have a computer in front of you, you can do it while I talk.
All right.
Okay, that's right. Well, the View tab that's right at the top, click on View. There's a little box that says Show, and then at the bottom it has this corner, and you click on that corner, and a new box pops up. And in that box, there's grid setting, and it's usually set to 1/8 of an inch, but you can change it. You bump down 4 times, and it goes to 1/24 or 0.04. Click OK. Then when you nudge something back and forth, it's so much smaller increments. And another thing you can do when you get to that show box is click on, it usually snap to grid is actually checked. Uncheck the box, and then you really have freedom moving stuff around. So if you've ever been like, oh, this sucks, I can't figure out what to do, that'll help you, and it alleviates a lot of headaches. Okay, another helpful tip. Okay, if you have a great image and you have a good vector file, and you bring it into PowerPoint, and you're like, oh, I want this to be a little bigger. And you drag it. Just you pick a side, and you go this way, and you go that way. It's going to distort the image. You don't want to distort the image. A way that you can, and the only reason I'm saying this, if you know how to do this correctly, sorry, I don't mean to think that you don't, but a lot of people don't. And this will help you so much. You hold shift down, grab the corner and pull, and then it will proportionately enlarge or reduce it. There would be nothing worse than having a great image then to make it fit a little better, you slightly distort it. So I've seen this a lot with logos. That's why I'm really, especially when the OSU logo was square, it was super noticeable because all of a sudden the square became a rectangle. So that's just a really good thing because then you won't distort your images and they'll look how they should. So another quick tip. Again, there's the template that can be used for whatever, and happy designing. And Jeff is going to come up and talk about content.
Thank you. All right, so those are obviously great tips for making your presentation look great. I want to talk a little bit about, in a presentation, some different ways to improve your content of the presentation. So the first thing is you don't, like Carrie said, want a whole bunch of words on a PowerPoint presentation because people won't pay attention to you, they'll read what's on the board. So these are directions, and the other problem with this is that you tend to start reading your PowerPoint presentation and you never want to read your PowerPoint presentation. So instead of sentences like this, they need to be bullets. And what I presented on the previous screen is actually shown right here in very simple words. So I could put that as my only slide and have all the same information presented, and I can fill in the gaps with my voice, which makes it much more interesting for the people who are paying attention to what you are talking about. And this is other information in how to make it even more simple. So I take this simple sentence and I can shorten it, and then I can even make it a one bullet subpoint so that it is very simple for people to read and they don't spend all their time paying attention to what you're actually writing. Another thing to think about is that bullets really shouldn't be art. Bullets should just be to point out new ideas. So when you get into the fancy bullets, it only distracts from the message that you're trying to give. So avoid the fancy bullets, use the simple art because you want your message to be heard. You don't want something to take away from it. So something very simple like this probably makes your presentation all the much more understandable, even though I really haven't changed anything. Another thing you want to do is make it a nice, simple presentation. If you use a whole bunch of different fonts, a whole bunch of different font sizes, a whole bunch of different colors, nobody knows what you're trying to point out. And this is an illustration of that. It also makes it sort of noisy on the screen, and you don't want it to be noisy. You want it to be very simple. A good example of that in the world today is Starbucks. Starbucks doesn't even need to put Starbucks up there anymore. They eliminated the word from their logo, and you know exactly what it is anyway. So they're simplifying it, but you still know what it is. So when you simplify it, you can see that looks much less distracting, much easier to pay attention to and to read, and you can read it very quickly and pay attention to what the person's saying. When it comes to graphical display, if you have two dimensions that you're trying to graph, only use two dimensions. So in other words, if you have an x-axis and a y-axis, and there's no information presented on the z-axis, don't present the z-axis. You also don't want a bunch of extraneous information like these lines, which really don't tell you much. And you don't want to take away their attention from the important points by making, in this case, ugly presentation. Instead, make it simple, get to the point so that they can see that suspensions were on the rise from our football team from 2008 to 2011. And that's all they need to know. When it comes to presenting information in tables, you want to make sure that you pay attention to the details. So for example, we have one column that is not wide enough, and I've broken up this word, which makes it difficult for people to understand. It's also very difficult for people to see in the back because of the small presentation. And I can't really highlight the one significant difference that I have there very easily in this particular presentation. So if I make the presentation more simple, I can highlight some of the information that I really want people to see and make it much easier for them to see and much more presentable. So again, they're paying attention to what I'm actually trying to get them to pay attention to. When it comes to the laser pointer, you want to use it sparingly. You especially don't want to underline the words that you're reading. You don't want to circle objects like this and make people sick. If you are very nervous for your presentation, I wish I had known this the first time I gave a presentation, because when I tried to point at something, it was like this, and that wasn't because I was trying to highlight that point, it was because I was nervous. So one of the things that you can do is put your laser pointer on the podium, or if you happen to be standing in the front of the room like I am, put your laser pointer on your other hand. That will help steady it and make it much easier. But don't use your laser pointer very often. Only use it when you want to highlight a particular part of a slide. A good rule of thumb is about 1 slide per minute. But as you become a more seasoned presenter, you probably will need fewer slides. You can spend more time on a particular slide. Or as you become even a more seasoned presenter, I can use 60 slides and I can present for a half hour or I can present for 2 hours. It's all about the anecdotal information that I give along with the presentation that I can extend for longer or shorter periods of time. And you're thinking, you better be done at noon then. And I promise you, I will almost be done at noon. But it, of course, depends on the amount of information that you're trying to give with each slide. So you might have more slides or you might have less slides. But just as a rule of thumb, when you're first beginning to present, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Never go over time. As I said, people absolutely hate going over time, especially when the next thing that they're doing is lunch. That's a really bad thing to do, so I'll be careful. You also want to know when you start the presentation where the clocks are in the room. So I'm watching the clock at the back of the room, even though you guys can't see it. One thing I have done previously is I have watched my phone when there wasn't a clock in the room. You kind of want to avoid that because what the comments that I got from the audience were, will you please stop paying attention to the text you're getting and pay attention to the presentation that you're doing? I literally was just trying to get them out on time. I wasn't reading my texts or anything. So you want to sort of avoid the phone. If there's no clock in the room and you use your phone, put it on the podium and walk by the podium every once in a while and check the time. Make sure you put it on so that the display doesn't go off so you don't have to push buttons or anything. All things to think about. I also never wear a watch because I think I have at least 4 clocks on my body at different places. But the other thing you can consider doing is wearing a watch if you don't wear one already. When you're first beginning to present, you sort of need to know what the next slide is. If it's a talk you've done a whole bunch of times, you know the slides by heart, and that's not difficult. But if it's the first time you're doing it, or if you haven't done a lot of presentations, use the presenter view. It is exceedingly helpful, and you can do lots of things in presenter view if you haven't seen it before. So you have your current slide. It also shows you the next slide. And one thing that I learned very early is I don't use slides that are jokes where I need to tell the joke and then the next slide is the punchline. Because every single time I do that, I would advance to the punchline and then tell the joke. And it just never works that way. The presenter view would have saved me from doing that, but unfortunately presenter view wasn't available back when I was beginning doing presentations. The other nice thing about presenter view is you can see the time, and that's not the time of day, unfortunately, but it's the time you spent doing it. So if you know you have a 50-minute presentation, you can watch the time. And you can type your notes in there. So if you do have some notes that you feel like you need to keep, you can see them on your presentation as long as you stay behind the podium. And then the nightmare is always getting your presentation to show on the computer and on the screen. You saw us with that nightmare earlier. The secret button that you need to know is F8, which usually toggles between seeing it only on your screen, seeing it only on the screen on, that the people watching take a look at, and then both at the same time. So just press Alt F8 or F8, and that usually gets you to the place where you need to be. I just want to show you one reference that I have read and absolutely love, and that's by Edward Tooft, I believe is how you say this, but it's the visual display of quantitative information. And it tells you how to make your point with presentations, how to keep it simple. For example, the thing that I was talking about before, if you only have 2 dimensions worth of data, don't ever have a graph with a 3rd dimension, because it only takes away from the information that you're trying to present. So this is a great book, and there's actually a series of books now. I think there's 4 in the series, and they are absolutely fabulous. Some of the more beautiful books I've ever seen. Ooh. Also, don't do that. Keep it simple. You don't want to mess things up, because when you make things difficult, what generally happens if you bring in things one at a time, if you're not a seasoned presenter, is you aren't watching the slide, and you talk about the whole slide, and then you realize, crap, I didn't advance it for each one of the different things, and now I'm way behind, and so you have to wait until you actually catch up. And when you do that, then it just takes away from your presentation. And see, I don't even know what's coming up next. God. So don't do this. Don't do what I'm doing. Oh, finally. So let's talk about manuscripts now. The second form of presentation that you'll be doing is writing manuscripts. They're very important. Most of you have written lots of manuscripts and probably know the majority of this, so I may not be telling you anything new, but hopefully I'll give you at least one or two hints. First thing you do when you write a manuscript is determine who your audience is and where you actually want to present it. So for an example in our profession is we have ophthalmologic journals and we have optometry journals. They're all related to the same thing. But if I want to present something on the control of myopia progression, I don't put it in an ophthalmologic journal because ophthalmologists aren't nearly as interested in that as optometrists are. So I know to go to the optometry journals in that particular case. You have the same type of examples in your area as well. So make sure you know the audience and you know the journal and who it goes to. And those are the journals you want to put it in because what's really important is that your manuscripts are cited. If people don't see it, they can't cite it. So you want to put it in front of the people who will see it and cite it ultimately. You also want to think about the journal's prestige factor. In other words, how many times is it cited? Some journals are cited far more often than others, partly because they have a lot more articles, but partly because people respect those journals and go to them on a frequent basis. So know the impact factor that the journal has, which is the number of times it's generally cited. And the higher the impact factor, the more times it's cited, the better it is that you publish in that particular journal. And that's a factor when it comes to tenure and promotion review. Co-authors on your paper should be responsible for all, if not some of these, or some, if not all of these things. Some journals will actually make you list what each of the different co-authors are responsible for. But nobody should be a co-author unless they are responsible for at least something here. So no gift co-authorship. It used to be that the department chair might be a co-author on your paper, might be the senior author on your paper. That's no more because they haven't been involved in the writing or reviewing of the manuscript. And if people haven't been involved in the writing or reviewing, they should not be listed as a co-author. They can be acknowledged in the acknowledgement sections, but not listed as a co-author. Some journals will have word counts. Some journals will charge you for figures, especially if they are color figures. So if you have something like this that's a color figure that you want to be presented, make sure you look up and see if there are going to be charges for that. If you have money for it, great. If you don't have money for it, this could just as easily be presented in different shades of gray. It doesn't need to be color. So make sure you consider that when you are presenting the different figures for the manuscript or making the different figures. If it doesn't require color, don't put it in color. When you are preparing, you always want to read and follow the instructions to authors because every single journal has different instructions for presenting in their journal. So know what it says about tables, know what it says about figures. I guarantee you what we all do is we all make our figures, and then when we go to submit, we find out that we have to actually make them in another piece of software, and we have to redo them, and that takes another 2 days, and it's a pain in the butt. If you can save yourself some time and some energy by simply doing that up front. So make sure you read the instructions to authors. They are very important. Also, make sure you read the instructions to authors about the bibliography. Fortunately, that's not such a big problem anymore because we have some wonderful things. The example I use most is EndNote. How many of you use EndNote as a reference manager? How many of you use a different reference manager? And how many of you really haven't ever used a reference manager, just to be sure? So there are lots of other options. This is just the one that I know and love. But make sure that you understand how to use this, and you can very simply take templates from the journals, plug it into EndNote or whatever reference manager that you use, and it will do all the formatting for you and do it appropriately. So make sure that you do that, please. Yeah.
So I've used templates before. Sometimes they're not actually accurate. Once you use them and have downloaded them from
Yeah.
websites, you still want to verify it's looking like it should, even though you're using the template.
From the website, that's interesting. So if you couldn't hear what she said, she's actually downloaded the template from the journal's website, and it wasn't accurate. My response to that would be, your template's not accurate. You can rearrange all this if you want it rearranged. No, I wouldn't do that because you'd be rejected immediately. But that's frustrating. That is extremely frustrating. So make sure you pay attention to the information after you actually put in the references. Remember that the abstract is often the only thing that people read. Actually, most often the only thing that people read is the title, which is very frustrating. But the second thing that they read the most often is the abstract. They frequently have word limits, and generally the abstract should be the last thing that you write. We always want to write it first, but it should probably be the last thing that you write. When you do, you want to write it succinctly, but get as much information in there as you can, and you should never be off of the word limit by more than 3 words. No, I'm just kidding. The reason I say that, though, is you really do want as much information in an abstract as you can possibly get, so you should be pretty close to the word limit in order to get that information in there. And then always remember that you will have to have keywords listed so that people can find your paper. So the keywords aren't just a pain in the butt. They're keywords that are actually published so that when people are typing in search items, they can find your paper. So make sure that you get the appropriate keywords in there. When it comes to the introduction, every journal is different. Some like extended introductions with lots of information. Some like an introduction that just says, here's the problem that we're trying to solve and here's how we're going to solve it. So make sure when you are submitting something to a journal that you haven't presented in before, make sure to read a couple of introductions so you know what they're looking for in the journal. I think it'll make it much easier. In general, though, what you need to convey in your introduction is what is known in the literature today, what is missing in the literature today, and what are we adding to the literature? How is our study different and important? When it comes to the methods, you need to put in enough information to allow somebody to reproduce the study that you are presenting in the manuscript. If you're doing a large clinical trial that has 50 protocols in it, only present the parts of the protocol that are used in your particular paper. Don't present all 50 of them. But present them in enough detail that somebody can read it and go do this experiment on their own later. There's generally also a statistical methods section, and that is the thing that you write just before the abstract, before submitting that. So that's almost the last thing. Wait until it's done. It'll be 10 times easier to write that statistical methods portion after you've already finished your results section. The results section, you shouldn't simply restate in the text what's in your figures and tables, because they can see it in your figures and tables, and guess where their eyes are going to go to? Figures and tables. They're not going to go to your text. So don't just restate things, maybe summarize things. Give bigger group means or something like that rather than present each individual group. Give the total sample means or something like that in the text. Make it different. When you have a table or figure in your paper, somebody should be able to pull it out with the figure legend and understand exactly what it's telling you. So make sure you think of that when you see it when you are ready to publish. And then make sure you organize things in a logical manner. When I'm reviewing papers, that's one of the biggest problems I have, is that the order doesn't make any sense. The information makes sense, but the order doesn't. And it's hard for me to understand what they're trying to tell. And then the discussion is pretty simple. You just want to compare to what's known in the literature, tell how their things are different and why you think your things are different. Tell the implications of the study. This is what we found out. This is what we think you should do. Tell the limitations of the study. If you don't tell the limitations, the reviewers are going to tell them and they're going to reject. So say your limitations up front, and then possibly talk about future studies, because that sort of directs where research should go from there. When you share your manuscript with co-authors, and every single co-author must review the manuscript. This is a problem that happens all the time, where you send the manuscript to all the co-authors and one doesn't respond. Give them a deadline, give them a second deadline, and if they don't respond by the second deadline, say, I assume this means you don't want to be an author on this paper. I'm happy to remove your name from this paper unless you respond by such and such date. Make sure that they understand that their responsibility is to review the paper and know the information that's presented in it. Otherwise, they really can't be a co-author. And a lot of times, some journals will actually say co-authors have to review. So you have that to back you up. I know it's not as easy as I just made it, saying to somebody you're not going to be a co-author, but it is something that you will have to negotiate at some time in your career, I can guarantee it. One other thing about corporate authorship is I hate corporate authorship, to be perfectly honest. So a paper that is listed as the PDIG study group, it is almost impossible to find that paper. I always remember papers by the first author's name. And when it's PDIG study group, you don't know if it's supposed to start with the, or if it starts with PDIG, or if it spells out the entire acronym, and it's really difficult to find those papers. So if you can, put corporate authorship as the last author or avoid it altogether. Try not to put it as the first or only author. It is very difficult. Now, some journals require it, but try and avoid that as much as you can. When you submit, you'd think that's the easy part of the process is submitting, but I guarantee you when you start the submission process, it will take an entire day, and you will have to change your figures because you will have forgotten to read the instructions, and that takes an additional 2 days. So make sure that you leave yourself enough time to go ahead and submit that. And it's different for every journal. Some of them want the figures in the paper, some of them want the figures separate, some of them want separate tables. It's obnoxious. So make sure that you know the submission process before you start it, and expect it to take a long time. The review from after you submit the paper generally takes 4 to 12 weeks. So don't expect to get something back in 1 to 2 weeks. It's not going to happen. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't bother the journal until they have had that paper for at least 8 weeks. Once they've had it for 8 weeks, then you might ask, where the heck is my review? But I would give them at least that much time. There will be comments from the reviewers. You should point by point go through. This is what the reviewer said, this is my response, and then you generally also have to do track changes on the paper, and then you generally also have to do a final copy of the paper. So make sure that you save all of those things separate. And of course, it may require several revisions, but make sure that that's allowed. And then once it's accepted, it'll take months before it's actually published. Fortunately, now we have publish ahead of print, so things are available electronically. I hate electronics published before you print because I can't reference it because I can't tell you where it's at. You can reference the website, but I can't tell you what page it's on. But it is something that's at least available, so it doesn't take quite as long for you to be able to publish. And really, I was just going to say a few things about if you are reviewing a paper on your own. If you're early in your career, you should ask your advisor if you can help them review a paper. So have you review it, have them review it, and then compare. You should ask your advisor to recommend you as a reviewer for journals, and you should publish. Those are the ways you get to be a reviewer for journals. In general, what we typically do for a review is just a quick summary of the paper and what we think the strengths of it are, and then general comments, which are big comments about study design, the way results are presented, and then specific comments where the grammar is poor or you think punctuation needs to be added or something like that. This bottom part is, if this is not very good, I don't do this because it's not worth my time. If this is really good, then I might do this to help the paper a little bit, but otherwise I don't bother with it. In your review, always avoid things like you should have collected, they didn't, so you're not going to be benefiting anybody by telling them what they should have collected in terms of data. Wouldn't it be great if? Yes, it would, but we didn't do that, so you can't, that's not helpful at all. It would have been better as, we know it would have been better as, but we didn't have any funding, so we couldn't spend thousands of dollars on this study. So we did the cheap version. So those comments only piss you off as somebody who submits a manuscript, so don't give them to people. Don't use that in your review. And in your review, avoid a specific recommendation. Don't say I accept or I reject in the review itself. There's a place for you to put that in that's separate from what the authors will see. It's the topical editor who decides whether it's rejected or accepted, not you. And then make sure that you do say yes to reviews, at least some of them, maybe not all of them, because you will be eventually asked to do tons of reviews, and that's only one thing that you do among the hundreds of other things. So make sure that you do accept some, especially if they are of interest to you and in your topic area. I would reject the ones that are outside of your comfort level and or aren't as interesting. I have said yes to those, and God, they're hard to put up to the top of your priority list. So you're doing the authors a disservice by taking a long time to do the review. So those are basic guidelines and things that I hope help your presentation skills. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And I did what I said not to do, and that's go over, so I apologize. Please. What should go into the letter to the editor? In terms of information that you're talking about somebody else's study, or your cover letter when you're submitting, your cover letter for submitting a manuscript, what I usually put in there is something like, I think that this particular manuscript is of interest to the readers of your journal because, and I hope that you will find this to be a meaningful manuscript that you think will be great for the readers and accept it. You know, something very simple like that. One paragraph is plenty, and you don't need to have a lot of detail. Just tell them why you think they should accept it in very general, easy terms. Great, thank you very much.